Right now, somewhere in America, there is a person who went to work on a Monday morning exactly like every other Monday morning for the past 6 years, sat down at their desk, opened their laptop, and found a meeting invitation from HR that wasn't there the day before. No warning. No signs they noticed. Just a calendar invite titled Important Update at 9 a.m. and a feeling in their stomach that something is wrong. By 9:30 a.m., they are cleaning out their desk. And the worst part is not the shock of that moment. The worst part is what comes after the realization that the paycheck stops. The bills don't. And the job market they are suddenly entering looks nothing like the one they left when they were hired. Because a recession doesn't just cost people their jobs. It changes the entire landscape of work, money, and opportunity in ways that most people never see coming and almost nobody prepares for in advance. This video is about understanding exactly why that happens. Not at a surface level of companies cut costs during recessions, because that explanation tells you nothing useful, but at the deeper level of cause and effect, of how the economic machine actually works, and why the same forces that destroy jobs for millions of people also create opportunities for the few who understand what is really happening. Stay with me through this entire video, because the second half, the part about how to actually protect yourself, is going to be more specific and more actionable than anything you have probably heard on this topic. But you need to understand the system first. Otherwise, the advice is just a list of things to do without any real understanding of why they work. Let's start at the beginning. What actually is a recession, in terms that go beyond the textbook definition? The official definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. GDP, gross domestic product, is the total value of everything an economy produces. When that number shrinks for 6 months straight, economists call it a recession. But that definition, while technically accurate, tells you almost nothing about what a recession actually feels like from the inside, or why it causes unemployment to spike so dramatically and so quickly. To understand that, you need to understand something called the demand cycle. And this is the first block, because everything else in this video connects back to it. An economy runs on spending. When people spend money, businesses earn revenue. When businesses earn revenue, they hire workers to produce more goods and services. When workers are employed, they earn income. When they earn income, they spend money. The cycle feeds itself. Each rotation of that cycle generates more activity, more jobs, more income, more spending. Economists call this the multiplier effect. $1 spent in an economy doesn't just create $1 of activity. It creates multiple dollars of activity as it moves from one person to the next. Now, here is what happens when something disrupts that cycle. It doesn't matter what causes the disruption. It could be a financial crisis like 2008, a pandemic like 2020, a spike in interest rates, a collapse in consumer confidence, a banking failure, a housing market implosion. Whatever the trigger, the effect on the cycle is the same. Spending slows down. And when spending slows down, businesses start seeing their revenue drop. At first, businesses don't immediately lay people off. They hope the slowdown is temporary. They cut discretionary spending, travel budgets, marketing budgets, office expenses. They freeze hiring. They delay expansions. They wait and see. But if the slowdown continues, if consumers keep pulling back, if credit tightens, if confidence stays low, businesses eventually reach a point where they have no choice but to cut their largest expense. And in most businesses, the largest expense is labor. This is where the feedback loop begins. And this feedback loop is the real reason recessions create unemployment at the scale and speed that they do. When a company lays off workers to cut costs, those workers immediately reduce their spending. They stop buying things they don't absolutely need. They cancel subscriptions, delay purchases, stop going out to restaurants, put off buying a car. Each of those spending cuts affects another business. That business now, seeing lower revenue, also starts cutting costs, which means more layoffs. Those newly laid off workers also cut their spending, which affects more businesses, which creates more layoffs. This is not a metaphor. This is the literal mechanism by which recessions spread through an economy. Each job lost is not just a personal tragedy for the person who lost it, it is also a reduction in spending that makes someone else's job less secure. The cycle that normally feeds growth now feeds contraction, and once it starts moving in that direction, it is extraordinarily difficult to stop, which is why even when they start from a relatively contained problem, can spread so quickly and affect so many people who had nothing to do with the original cause. Think of it like a series of falling dominoes. The first domino might be something specific, a housing market that collapses, a bank that fails, a pandemic that forces businesses to close. But the dominoes it knocks over are not random. They follow a pattern. Consumer spending falls first, then business revenue drops, then hiring freezes, then layoffs begin. Then consumer spending falls further, then more businesses fail. Then credit tightens, making it harder for people and businesses to borrow. Then spending falls even more. Each domino is larger than the last, and the further the chain goes, the harder it becomes to stop. Now let's go one level deeper, because there is something happening inside this cycle that most people never think about, and it explains why unemployment during recessions doesn't just go up a little. It often goes up dramatically, quickly, and in ways that seem disproportionate to whatever originally triggered the recession. It comes down to how businesses make decisions about labor, and specifically to the concept of fixed costs versus variable costs. When a business hires an employee, that employee is not just a salary, they are a fixed cost that includes salary, benefits, payroll taxes, office space, equipment, training, and management time. A full-time employee with a $60,000 salary might cost a business $80,000 or $90,000 per year when you add up all those additional costs. And that cost exists regardless of whether the business is having a good month or a bad month. The rent still comes due, the payroll still runs, the benefits still have to be paid. When revenue drops, businesses face a very specific mathematical problem. Their costs are largely fixed, but their revenue is falling. The gap between what they earn and what they spend, their margin starts to compress. And there is a point, different for every business, where that gap becomes unsustainable, where continuing to operate at current staffing levels means burning through cash reserves until the business itself fails. So business is cut, and they cut faster than most people expect, because waiting too long is existentially dangerous. A business that waits 3 months too long to cut costs might not have enough cash left to survive. So when the signal comes that a recession is real and revenue is not coming back quickly, businesses make large cuts quickly, which is why unemployment during recessions doesn't creep up slowly. It spikes. It can go from 4% to 10% in a matter of months, as it did in 2020. Because thousands of businesses are making the same calculation at the same time and reaching the same conclusion. There is another layer to this that almost never gets discussed in mainstream financial media, and it is one of the most important things to understand about recessions and employment. It is the concept of which jobs disappear first and which ones don't disappear at all. Not all jobs are equally vulnerable during a recession. The pattern is consistent enough across multiple recessions that economists have identified clear categories of employment that contract first and hardest, and clear categories that remain relatively stable or even grow. The jobs that disappear first are almost always in sectors that depend on discretionary consumer spending: restaurants, hotels, entertainment, retail, real estate, construction, advertising, and luxury goods are typically hit first and hardest. These are sectors where consumers can and do pull back immediately when they feel economically uncertain. You can stop going to restaurants. You can delay buying a new couch. You can skip the vacation. When millions of consumers make those decisions simultaneously, the businesses serving them face revenue drops that are immediate and severe. The jobs that tend to remain stable during recessions are in sectors that provide things people need, regardless of economic conditions. Healthcare, utilities, government, basic food production, essential retail like grocery stores, and certain areas of finance and legal services tend to hold up much better. People still get sick during recessions. Electricity still needs to be generated. Food still needs to be produced and sold. These sectors are not immune to recessions, but they are significantly more resilient. And then there's a third category that surprises most people: the jobs that actually grow during recessions. Debt collection, bankruptcy law, financial restructuring, discount retail, mental health services. In certain areas of technology tend to see increased demand during economic downturns. When people and businesses are financially stressed, the services that help them navigate that stress become more valuable, not less. Understanding which category your job falls into is one of the most important pieces of information you can have going into an economic downturn, because the person working in discretionary retail and the person working in healthcare are not facing the same risk, and they should not be making the same decisions about how to prepare. Now let's talk about what you actually do, because everything I've described so far is the mechanism, the why, and understanding the why matters. But at some point you have to translate that understanding into action. And the actions that actually protect people during recessions are not complicated, but they require doing things before the recession arrives. Because by the time the layoffs start, many of the most effective protective moves are no longer available to you. The first and most critical protection is what I call the recession runway, your emergency fund, but not the generic 3 to 6 months of expenses advice you hear everywhere. Because that advice, while directionally correct, misses something important about how recessions work. During a normal personal financial disruption, you lose your job, but the overall economy is fine. 3 to 6 months of savings is often enough because the job market is healthy and you can find new work relatively quickly. During a recession, that assumption breaks down completely. When the overall economy is contracting and unemployment is rising across multiple sectors simultaneously, finding a new job takes significantly longer. During the 2008 recession, the average duration of unemployment peaked at over 40 weeks. That is 10 months. During COVID, millions of people were out of work for 6 months or more. 3 months of savings is not a runway during a recession. It is a very short bridge to a cliff. The recession runway needs to be 6 to 12 months of essential expenses. Not total expenses, but the non-negotiable ones: rent or mortgage, utilities, food, insurance, minimum debt payments. Everything else can be cut if it comes to that. But those core expenses need to be covered for at least 6 months. Ideally 12, without any income coming in. That runway gives you the time to find the right opportunity rather than the desperate one. And the difference between finding the right opportunity and the desperate one, compounded over a career, can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The second protection is income diversification. And this is the concept that most people understand intellectually, but very few act on before they need it. The fundamental vulnerability of depending entirely on a single employer for 100% of your income is not that your employer might be bad or that your job might be It is that a single point of failure in your income is catastrophically risky in a world where recessions are a normal and recurring feature of the economic cycle. Income diversification does not have to mean starting a business or becoming an entrepreneur. It can be as simple as developing a skill that you can monetize independently. Writing, design, coding, tutoring, consulting in your area of professional expertise. It can be freelance work on the side. It can be a rental income stream from a property. It can be dividend income from investments. The specific form matters less than the principle that when your primary income is disrupted, something else continues to come in. Even a few $100s a month from a secondary income source can dramatically reduce the financial pressure of a job loss and give you the time to make better decisions. The third protection is career positioning. And this requires thinking about your professional situation through the lens of recession vulnerability before the recession arrives. The question to ask yourself is not, is my job secure right now? Because almost every job feels secure when the economy is growing. The question is, if my company's revenue dropped 30% next year, would my role be one of the ones they kept? The roles that survive recessions inside companies are the ones that are directly connected to revenue generation, cost reduction, or core operational necessity. Salespeople who bring in revenue, finance people who manage cash flow, operations people who keep essential functions running. The roles that get cut first are the ones that are easier to defer marketing teams during revenue crunches. Administrative support, middle management layers, project roles tied to expansion plans that are now on hold. If an honest assessment of your role suggests you are in the vulnerable category, the time to address that is before the recession, not during it. That might mean building skills that make you more directly valuable to your employer's core business. It might mean positioning for a different role internally. It might mean proactively building external opportunities so that a layoff, if it comes, is a transition rather than a crisis. The fourth protection is debt management, and specifically, the relationship between debt and recession vulnerability is something that almost nobody talks about clearly enough. Debt is a fixed cost. Just like a business's payroll, your debt payments come due regardless of what is happening to your income. And just as fixed costs are what ultimately force businesses to make layoffs, fixed costs are what ultimately force individuals into financial crises during a recession. The person who loses their job with $50,000 in high-interest credit card debt, a car payment, and a mortgage at the top of their budget is in a fundamentally different position than the person who loses their job with 6 months of savings, no consumer debt, and a manageable housing cost. This does not mean you need to be debt-free to survive a recession. It means you need to understand your fixed monthly obligations, the floor of what you must pay every month, no matter what, and make sure that floor is low enough that you could cover it for an extended period if your income stopped. Every dollar of debt you eliminate before a recession arrives is a dollar of monthly obligation you don't have to cover with savings or secondary income during the downturn. The fifth protection is the one that makes the others possible, and it is simply staying informed about the economic environment around you and taking the signals seriously before they become obvious. Recessions are not sudden events. Even when they feel that way, they are usually preceded by months of warning signs that are visible to anyone who is paying attention. Rising interest rates, falling consumer confidence, slowing job growth, yield curve inversions, declining corporate earnings, guidance. These signals don't guarantee a recession is coming, but they indicate elevated risk, and elevated risk is exactly when the protective moves we've been discussing become most urgent. The people who come through the recessions in the strongest position are almost never the ones who are simply lucky enough to have a recession-proof job. They are the ones who read the environment, took the signals seriously, and made deliberate decisions before the pressure arrived. They built the runway before they needed it. They diversified their income before their primary income was threatened. They reduced their fixed costs before revenue dropped. They positioned their careers before the cuts came. Preparation during calm is what creates options during chaos. And options, the ability to choose your next move rather than being forced into whatever is available, are the difference between a recession being a temporary setback and a permanent financial scar. So let's bring all of this together into something you can take away from this video and actually use. Recessions happen because economies run on spending, and when spending slows for any reason, the feedback loop of reduced revenue, cost-cutting, layoffs, and further spending reduction creates a self-reinforcing contraction that is difficult to stop once it starts. The unemployment that results is not random. It follows predictable patterns, hitting discretionary sectors first and hardest, while leaving essential sectors relatively intact. Understanding where your work sits in that pattern is the beginning of real recession preparation. The practical protection comes down to 5 things that work together as a system. A recession runway of 6 to 12 months of essential expenses. Income diversification that reduces your dependence on any single source. Career positioning that makes you as directly valuable as possible to your employer's core business. Debt reduction that lowers your fixed monthly obligations to the most manageable level possible. An ongoing awareness of economic signals that allows you to act before the pressure arises rather than in response to it. None of these things are complicated. All of them require time to put in place. And the best time to put them in place is always before you need them, which is exactly what makes them so difficult for most people to prioritize. The economy will have another recession. It always does. It is not a question of if, but when. And when it arrives, the difference between the people it devastates and the people it barely touches will not be luck. It will be preparation. Now you know what that preparation looks like. If this video gave you a clearer picture of how recessions actually work and what to do about them, hit that like button and subscribe. We post every week with content that actually helps you navigate the financial world more intelligently. Drop a comment below. What is your biggest concern about the next recession? I read every single one. See you in the next one!